All right, it is 2 o'clock, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. If you're just now joining the chat, go ahead and type your first and last name in the chat box for me so that I can take attendance. Again, my name is Emily. I'll be doing your food for thought videos each Tuesday at 2 o'clock. So for this week 2, we're going to be talking about labels. So just kind of the basics of nutrition labels, how to read them, what to watch out for, certain verbiage, certain tricks that marketing companies will try and play on your mind a little bit to get you to buy their products. So just a little bit of a 101 basics on nutrition labels. All right, so just some of the main components to start out with on a nutrition label. If you're not super familiar with how to read one or a little bit confused by the percentages and stuff like that, it can be definitely very confusing for a beginner reading a nutrition label. So first things first, it's going to be the serving sizes per container. So the calories and all of the nutrients listed on a nutrition label are not going to be for the entire package, right? Typically, it's going to be separated by servings per container. So whether that's 1 cup or 20 grams or 14 chips, whatever that may be, that's going to be the calories and everything underneath that listed per that one serving. So that's going to be right up at the top. Is going to tell you the amount. So either, this one has 1 cup for 227 grams if you're weighing your food like that. So on the right-hand column of a nutrition label, now that it's updated, it's going to be the percent daily values. So these are based off of a 2,000 calorie diet, which not everybody's on, but it's just kind of an average percentage. How much of this nutrient should be in your 2,000 calorie diet. So for this label in particular, it has 9 grams of fat. So the percent on the right is telling you that that is 12% of your fat intake for the day if you're eating a 2,000 calorie diet. Next, just kind of going down the line, we have our carbohydrates listed. Those are broken down into fiber and sugars or added sugars. We have our protein listed at the bottom. We have fat, and that's kind of broken down into saturated fat, unsaturated fat, and trans fat, which we'll dive a little bit deeper into next week on what that really means, how much you should be getting in each week, etc. Next, we have sodium. So we really want to keep an eye out on this. This particular nutrition label has quite a bit of sodium, 850 milligrams. Typically, we want to keep our sodium under 2,300 milligrams per day. So just in this 1 cup serving on this particular nutrition label, that's quite a bit of your sodium per day. So just something to kind of keep an eye out for. Again, sugar. So sugar on nutrition labels can be confusing because it's in grams, right? Typically, when people see that, their brain doesn't say, oh, this has a lot of grams of sugar, right? It's not really something that the normal person would comprehend, right? If it was in teaspoons, I think that would be much more eye-opening to people, right? This product has 10 teaspoons of sugar versus this product has 5 grams of sugar, right? It's just kind of that mind game that we just need to be aware of. And then fiber, as that's broken down in one of the carbohydrate categories. Women typically should aim for about 21 to 25 grams of fiber per day. Men around 30 to 38 grams per day. And then lastly, cholesterol is going to be on a nutrition label, and we want to keep that no more than 300 milligrams per day. I know I'm kind of throwing a lot of information at you, so if you have a question, feel free to speak up or type in the chat box and let me know. So now we're just going to kind of break down the 3 macronutrients. So protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Those 3 things are the only nutrients that are going to provide our body with energy, right? So those 3 things are essential in every single person, every single day, regardless of your height, weight, gender, activity level. You need protein, carbohydrates, and fat in your diet in order to live, right? So protein, we typically want to have about 10 to 35% of our daily calories coming from protein. So protein is made of 20 amino acids. 9 of those are essential, which you must get through your diet. That means that your body can't produce those amino acids. So if the protein that you're eating has all 9 types of amino acids that you need to get from food, it's called a complete protein. Some examples of that would be fish, poultry, eggs, certain dairy products, beef, soy products, things like that. So protein is going to be the most satisfying macronutrient, meaning it's going to keep you full. It's going to provide a little bit of energy. Mostly that comes from carbs, but it's going to provide a little bit of energy, but it's really going to help keep you satiated and full for a good amount of time. So that's why everyone says, when you're trying to lose weight or when you're trying to even maintain weight, try and have some sort of a protein in each meal throughout the day in order to really keep yourself satiated, full, and have that energy throughout the day that we need. So how much protein is recommended for each person? Typically, the rule of thumb is about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So to find the kilogram of body weight, you multiply your body weight, or you divide it by 2.2. And that tells you your weight in kilograms. And typically for the average individual, you should aim for about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight. For athletes, it's a bit more. Obviously, they're expending more energy. They need that protein to repair their muscles. So in general, protein is 4 calories per gram. It builds and repairs your muscles, your tissues. It also helps with immune function, hormone production, and enzymes. So moving on to the second macronutrient, carbohydrates. This is the one that we need the most of. It's the main source of fuel for our bodies, provides us with the most energy, helps with brain function. So same as protein, carbohydrates will contain 4 calories per gram. So typically people should aim for about 45 to 65% of their daily calories coming from carbohydrates. So carbs are broken down into simple carbs and complex carbs, right? So simple carbs are what kind of gets that bad rap. So it's going to be those white breads, sugary beverages, candy, glucose, fructose, soda, things like that. Complex carbohydrates is going to be those rich, fiber-rich carbs that our body is going to thrive off of, help keep us full. Things like fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, brown rice, things like that. And then starches are also complex carbohydrates. So things like potatoes, legumes, whole grain bread, fortified cereal or granola, oats, quinoa, things like that. So moving on to the last macronutrient we're going to talk about today is fat. So in our sort of energy system, fat is going to be second behind carbs. So we're going to get most of our energy from our carbs. If we really, really, really use all of that up, we'll take a little bit from fat. So typically we want to have about 20 to 35% of our daily calories coming from fat. Now, fat has 9 calories per gram, whereas protein and carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. So fat is a higher calorie option, but that doesn't mean we need to avoid it. We absolutely need to have fat in our diet. It helps support brain function, nerve function, hormones. It helps us absorb a lot of vitamins and minerals. And it also, like I said, provides us with that second burst of energy after we use up our carbs. So fat is broken down into trans fat, saturated fat, and unsaturated fat, which again, we will dive a little bit deeper into next week, but just an overall explanation. Trans fat, we want to completely avoid. It's actually artificial trans fats are banned in the United States. So we really, really want to avoid those. Things like hydrogenated vegetable oils, certain fast foods might have a little bit, but we really want to keep an eye out on those. Saturated fat, we want to keep about 10% or less of our total fat intake from saturated fats. So typically, not all the time, but typically saturated fats are going to be solid at room temperature. So things like butter, bacon, cheese, things that kind of like cured meats. So hot dogs, bologna, things like that. And then unsaturated fat, we want the most of. So that's going to be what people consider healthy fats, right? Typically, not all the time, but most of the time, this is liquid at room temperature. So things like avocados, extra virgin olive oil, raw nut butters, fatty fish, nuts and seeds are going to be your main sources of unsaturated fat. And this is a little, did you know, this kind of gets a little bit complicated, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it. But no company by law in America has to put the actual percentage of fat on their label, which to me is quite concerning. So companies purposely put a low percentage, so that right column, percentage of fat, or the word lean, or low fat, or natural, or healthy, to kind of trick you into buying it. It's one of their biggest marketing schemes in the food industry. Those words are not regulated by any law, so they're allowed to use them on any sort of packaging to kind of trick us into buying their products. So when you see words like the word lean, it simply means that it has under 10 grams of fat in a serving. That is kind of a serving by weight, so the weight of the product, not fat by calories. So people are concerned with fat by calories because we're consuming those calories. We're not kind of taking in the weight of the food, right? So that's kind of how companies trick our minds into thinking that it's a lower fat food, but it can still very well be a very high fat food. So things to look out for. This is the kind of fat formula to find the actual percentage of fat by calories versus by weight. So you take the grams of fat. So in this example, it's a package of ground turkey. So you would take those 8 grams of fat, times it by 9, because fat has 9 calories per gram. And then you divide it by the calories that in that serving. So in this case, it's 160. And that would give you the fat percentage by calories versus by weight. So you find that in this ground turkey, it actually has 45% fat in comparison to calories versus by weight, which is the exact same as a T-bone steak, right? So that kind of tricks our mind. Obviously, ground turkey is still a healthier option than plenty of other processed foods in the store, but just something to kind of keep an eye out for and watch when you're trying to limit your fat intake. Even things like those 0-calorie or fat-free spray oils or spray butters do have calories and fat in them. If you look closely at the serving size, it'll say maybe like 1/3 of a second per spray is what your serving is, right? Nobody's counting 1/3 of a second when you're spraying your spray oil or spray butter, right? So it's obviously a much better choice than just pouring oil or pouring butter into your food, but it's still something to kind of keep an eye out for and just be mindful of. Similarly, like we kind of discussed in the beginning, sugar on labels is super confusing for a lot of people. For example, a regular bottle of Mountain Dew has 77 grams of sugar, and that in turn equals about 20 teaspoons of sugar, right? So if people read that and say 77 grams of sugar, a lot of people won't really process that. They'll say, okay, I don't really understand what that means in an actual amount of sugar, but sure. Versus if that was in teaspoons rather than grams, I think people would be a lot more conscious about purchasing certain foods and beverages just based on the sheer amount of sugar that they can picture in their head. And lastly, here's your little take action for the upcoming week until next Tuesday. Next time you're at the grocery store, so if you do another grocery haul this week, or even just comparing items in your own house, compare the nutrition labels of 2 of your favorite cereals or granolas or things like that. I really want you to kind of keep an eye out on that sugar. Look at the grams of sugar in one versus the other, and kind of make an informed decision on which one to either buy or which one to eat in your own house if you're comparing those two, based on your new knowledge of reading those nutrition labels. So when you do that, please just take a picture of each label, maybe side by side, and then next week we'll kind of discuss why you chose the one that you did and talk about it then. So does anybody have any questions or comments, would like to talk about anything? I'm trying to look at the chat box here, 1 second.